This is a tutorial on a technique that I call Strantarsia. It's a word I coined myself because the technique is partly stranded and partly intarsia. The reason for this is that I'm knitting a QR code, one of those quick response codes that you can scan with your mobile phone, onto an iPad cover which is knitted in the round. I started off with Judy's magic cast on at the bottom of the work and worked in rounds with the black yarn until I reached the section where I wanted the colour work to start. In normal stranded work, the patterning will go all the way round, which means that both yarns carry themselves together as you work. With this one, as you can see, it's completely black all the way around the back, and the patterning is only on this front panel here. Intarsia won't work because the complicated configuration of black and white squares means that you'd end up with hundreds of bobbins of yarn getting tangled up, and it would just be a complete nightmare. So how else to do it? You can work Strantarsia very simply with a complicated stranded pattern, two colours, on just one section of a piece of work, and that's what I'm going to demonstrate here. So I've got to the stage where I've knitted almost to where I want my Strantarsia panel to begin. I'm going to knit these last two stitches, and it's important to get a little twist between the yarns here so that we don't have two separate panels of work here, and in order to do that I'm just going to take the black yarn over the top and pick up the white yarn from below and get ready to knit with that. You can see the white yarn is coming from below the black yarn. Hold that black yarn out the way nice and tightly and then just carry on knitting with the white. That's how you start. What do you do when you get to a colour change? Well, it's simple. This section is exactly the same as standard Fair Isle would be. To knit those next two white stitches, and then all I need to do when I want a black stitch is knit with the black yarn. Every time I make a colour change, I'm very careful to make sure I spread the stitches out on my right needle so that the float across the back doesn't get too tight and pucker the work. Carry on knitting nice and loosely with the black, and then I'm going to change back to the white yarn here. There you go. So the first row of a Strantarsia panel is very, very standard, two colour stranded work, nice and simple. I'm going to continue this all the way across the row, knitting with whichever colours are required by my pattern, and I'm using a charted QR code as my pattern for this project, but you could use anything, maybe flowers or animals, as long as it's just in two colours, and keep going all the way across until you get to the other side. Then I'll show you how to match things up and carry on. Most traditional Fair Isle patterns are worked out so that there's never more than a few stitches of any one colour at a time, so you don't end up with long floats going across the back, which can lead to all sorts of snagging or snapping problems or puckering the work. Obviously this is not a traditional Fair Isle pattern, and you're beholden to whatever the QR code requires you to be. So for this one you will end up with some longer floats than necessary, so I'm just going to demonstrate how the simplest way I know to catch those floats at the back. I'm working across this section with a lot of white stitches in a row, so I'm definitely going to want to catch the yarn. In order to do that, the way I'm holding the yarn, with one yarn in each hand, I'm knitting with the white at the moment, I'm going to knit through the next black stitch exactly as normal, but instead of just holding the black yarn out the way and wrapping the white yarn like that, I'm going to make sure that the black yarn comes to the front of the right needle, and then I'm going to knit it with the white. What that does is it holds the black yarn in between those black stitches. It's very difficult to see on this, but it holds them between those stitches and secures the float into the back of the stitches. I'll do it one more time for you so you can see exactly what I'm doing. In as normal with the right needle, bring the black yarn just over the top of the right needle and wrap the white yarn as normal and knit through. And there we have our beautifully caught and tidy float across the back. No more large black floats. I show you the back there, you can see it's all nicely tidied in together, nothing going across the back. What happens if you want to catch a long white float instead of a long black float? Well, with the yarns exactly the same way around, no swapping over, there is a way of doing this as well, and I'll demonstrate now. I'm currently knitting a long section of black stitches, about 8 in a row here. So I'll do the first few, like so, and now I want to make a little catch. I want to catch this white yarn so it doesn't have a long float across the back. So what do? I insert the needle as if to knit as normal. I'm going to wrap the white yarn around, then I'm going to wrap the black yarn around, then take the white back the way it came and pull through. That's all there is to it. What that's done is you can see the white float here disappearing into the back of that black stitch, holding it nicely in place. I'll knit another black stitch and I'll show it to you again. So here's where I'm going to do the catch. Insert the needle, wrap the white yarn, wrap the black, unwrap the white, and knit through. So now you can catch floats of either colour without having to swap your yarns around in your hand and carry on knitting. I've now worked my way across the row of the Strantarsia panel, working the black and the white stitches as necessary, and I just want to show you how I bind the two panels together before I go back into flat knitting on the other side. So I've got the last two white stitches here. I'm just going to knit the first one, and then with the last one I always do that little catch again, coming through, bring the black yarn over, and then work with the white again. What that does is it just makes a nice tidy little join and binds the two sides of the fabric together before I then continue working with the black. Now I've got no more white stitches for the next 100 or so stitches, so I'm just going to drop the white, and I'm an English knitter rather than a continental, so off I go. All the way around the back, knitting with my black, pretending the Strantarsia, isn't even happening. What of course this is going to mean is that my white yarn, when I get round to the other side, is in the wrong place. That's easily fixed, and I'll show you how. Now we've worked all the way around the back with the black yarn, and we're ready to start again at the front with our white section. But, what do you know? That pesky white yarn is on the wrong side of the section we're about to work. How do we cope with that? It's actually quite simple, it just takes a couple of stages, which I'll demonstrate for you now. Firstly, we're just going to slip those white stitches because we don't have the yarn to play with them yet. And then I'm going to start working the black stitches with the black yarn exactly as normal. Every time I change colour, I'm just going to spread those stitches out on the needle to make sure that the float across the back is not pulling tight, otherwise the work will pucker. And then knit the second black stitch. Here we are, more white stitches, so we slip them. Back to the black, which will work as normal. Continue doing this all the way along until you get to the last white stitch in the panel on the QR code, and I'll join you when that's done. Here we are now. I've worked my way all the way across this section of the Strantarsia, if you like, work, and I've just got the final two white stitches left to slip. I've slipped all the white stitches along the way, and I've knitted all the black stitches with the black yarn. So I'm going to slip those last two stitches, and I can show you how we turn back and work in the other direction. It's important to make sure we twist the yarns together between the white border and the black, so I'm going to take the black yarn over the top and pick up the white yarn from underneath. And if you can see there, the white yarn is coming from underneath the black. Now what I'm going to do, is keeping that black yarn tucked out of the way, is have some fun, and this is where the fun really begins. I'm going to knit backwards, so I'm going to be knitting from the right needle onto the left, which is the exact opposite of how most people knit all the way in their normal lives. In order to do that, we take the left needle and insert it through what is the back loop of the white stitch on the right needle. We wrap the yarn anti-clockwise, just as you do for any other type of standard knitting. bring the needle back through the work and slip it off. Then once again we insert the left needle through the back loop, you can see how it looks there, through the back loop, wrap the yarn anti-clockwise, draw the loop through and slip the stitch off the right needle. Once again, in through the back loop, you can see what that looks like there. Wrap the yarn around the left needle, draw the loop back through and slip off, and once more. In through the back loop, wrap the yarn anti-clockwise, draw the loop through and slip off. So now those stitches that were slipped on the way across have now been knitted on the way back. We've got to some black stitches, which of course we knitted on the last pass. We don't need to knit them now, so we just slip those from one needle to the other, and we're ready to start working the white again, backwards, mirror knitting if you like. And because I've changed colour here, I want to make sure that I've spread those stitches out nicely so they won't pucker at the back. And then I'll knit the other one backwards. Slipping the black stitches, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And here we are now again ready to work the white stitches. So once again in through the back loop, wind anti-clockwise, draw through and slip off. It's exactly the same as a normal knit stitch, it's just done in the other direction. The only real difference is to make sure that you're slipping that first needle in through the back loop rather than what would seem like a natural mirror reflection of a normal knit stitch through the front loop. Slip those black stitches, 1 and 2, and carry on across the work. As you can see, I've come all the way across with my white yarn, knitting backwards and slipping all the black stitches, and I've just got one final white stitch before I reach the end of this panel. And I'll show you what we need to do next. I'm going to knit that final stitch there, backwards of course, pull it through and slip it off. And now, of course, I want to continue my round from here, which is where the black yarn is waiting for me. So all I need to do is slip my way across all of these stitches on this front panel and keep going until I get to the end of the white panel where my black yarn is waiting patiently for me, and I can pick it up and continue knitting as normal round the back of the project back to where we started. And through the wonders of modern technology, here I am at the other end of my Strantarsia panel. The black yarn is as we hoped it would be, waiting for us, and I'm ready to carry on knitting all the way around the back until I get to the beginning of the next Strantarsia row, where miraculously both my white and black yarns will be together, ready to do a standard Fair Isle row. One thing you will want to be able to do while you're going backwards across the Strantarsia section of the work is to make sure that if you have any long sections of white stitches, that there will be a long black float across the back, and we don't want that to be too long so it's flappy and can get caught on things. So know how to catch that float. It's quite simple. What I'm going to do now is I want to catch that float before I knit the next stitch. So I'm going to just put my needle down through it. You see that there? Down through that float there. I'm going to wrap the yarn over that needle and pull it back through the float there. That's not a knitted stitch, that's just me getting the yarn up where I want it. So I've pulled that yarn through the float, and now when I go to knit the next stitch, what that does is it catches the black yarn into that stitch, and there it is, just there, see if I can get it into focus, caught nicely between those stitches. The only thing to be aware of when you're doing this is that you'll need to catch each float an even number of times, because that's pulling it through the loop and getting it up there one way. Now to catch it again, the second part, all I do is I pull the working tail all the way back down through that float once more, and knitting the next stitch, backwards of course, will catch that float a second time. And on the back of the work you can now see there and there that the black float is caught in the white stitches, and then you can carry on knitting backwards, wrapping the yarn anti-clockwise and bringing it through, and off you go. Let me show you that again. Coming up, I've got 8 white stitches in a row, and that's going to leave a very nasty long black float across the back if I'm not very careful. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to knit the first 3 stitches, 2 or 3, it doesn't really matter, whatever you feel comfortable doing, making sure I spread any other floats out as we go. Knit the first 3 stitches, and then I'm going to want to catch that black float that's hanging there at the back, all menacing and difficult. I'm going to want to catch that between these next 2 stitches. So what I do is I bring my left needle down through the float from sort of front to back, if you like, take the yarn over the top of it there and bring the needle back up. All that's doing is bringing a loop of the working white yarn through that looped float, and then I just need to knit backwards again, wrapping the yarn, pulling through, and that has already caught that float nicely into the white yarn there as we go along. I'll do one more stitch, knitting backwards of course, and then I'm going to want to catch it again, and I have to because everything has to be done in even numbers when we're working like this, purely and simply because I've pulled a loop through that float. Now I need to pull that loop back again out the other side. So pulling on the working yarn, the loop disappears back down through the float, and I carry on knitting. And that's all there is to it. Inevitably, because I'm working in 2 directions, I can only do this with one set of the yarn. I can't do it with the others, so I will end up with some white floats at the back of the work, like that one that you can see there. When we're all stretched out, it doesn't matter. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it is just one of the pitfalls of doing this method. But I think the pitfalls are far outweighed by the benefits of something looking quite so impressive.